kind of smelt it.
Yeah, 3 Shieldreds in that last one. That was
No,
kind of nuts.
even the jelly. I think I had winning chances game 2 and in game 3.
Mm. I think you had some solid winning chances game 2. Um,
Mm-hmm.
Game 3, I feel like there was just too many things that you had to counter because each of those
Yeah,
Shellys would outrace you, and like you could have done like the game
yeah.
of bouncing it back and forth with whatever
I
weird
was
spells you
deep in the
found.
tank. I was deep in the tank over letting the Shelly resolve and fading hoping it a couple times. And I'm
Mhm.
like, that I'd really just rather in the graveyard than in your hand for
Yeah,
obvious reasons.
yeah,
And
but then having the second
considering,
and then having the third, that was
well,
nuts.
the third was tough. And man, the board, I feel like I leveled myself a lot in the board also. Um it was interesting that the Grixis deck was able to turn into more of a control deck
We'll
in
just have so
game
many so
2
many
and
options
3.
for removal, uh,
Yeah.
and especially because like its worst matchup is blue, so you've got a lot of cards for blue.
Yeah. I also thought like I didn't board in negate. I probably should have boarded in negate instead of essence capture. I thought you were going to go a slightly different way in game 2, so I boarded in more creature interaction. And then game 3, I boarded out the essence. I think most of the essence captures, boarded back in a spell pierce and something out. I think I boarded out a Delver.
Mhm.
Um, but then that felt wrong. As soon as I like saw my opening hand, I had like 2 Fading Hopes in it. I'm like, I don't think Fading Hope was actually right to keep in this matchup. I think I should have boarded out both Fading Hopes or all the Fading Hopes, kept in the Delver, boarded into Gates for game 2 and 3, and tried to interact with you more solidly on the stack.
Yeah,
Um,
because I'll here. Let me pull up my board so that you can see like what you were boarding
yeah,
against.
yeah. Because my spell pierces were way worse than a negate in game 3, at least.
Hmm.
And in game 2, for that matter. Like, being able to hard counter Lily and a burn down the house would have been nice.
Yeah, either of those cards with what I was boarding, I boarded in both burn down the houses, so
Yeah.
that's 2 like 5 mana spells that you're fighting against. I boarded
But
in Soul Transfer, boarded in
yeah.
Rose Vortex,
Yeah.
boarded out Cut Down.
Theoretically, Spell Pierce should be good against Burn Down the House, and maybe that's it. Burn Down the House and Fable on curve and Lily on curve. But like you're not really forced to play on curve. It's actually probably
No,
best for you not to play on curve. You just play lands and then wait for me to overcommit, then deal with the limited number of creatures I have, and then just win.
yeah, well,
Do I need to
me.
apply more pressure to you? Yeah, from your side, yeah.
Yeah, well, that's the thing. Like, I'm totally fine trying to commit these like little 2 drops, right?
Yeah.
Because
That's what I mean. They're not that important.
yeah, they're not that important, which is why I'm fine like just playing them out. And if I don't have to play on curve, I'm
Yeah.
fine not playing on curve. But it does
Yeah.
like a lot of the times you will just end up with enough must counter cards that you can't possibly have enough in your hand. The thing is, like in that last game, I was so surprised when you countered the Blood Tithe Harvester on turn 2 because I thought that there's no way that the game would work out where this is an important card.
Yeah. Well, you didn't see my hand.
Yeah,
I
I'm
start. I
guessing
started
it
the
was all
game.
counters.
I had started the game with 3 Make to Spears in hand and needed to draw into more stuff. So I just needed to survive until I drew my way out of it.
Hmm.
And like it was a mold of 6 where I had 3 islands, 3 Make to Spear. like okay, or 3 islands, 3 Make to Spear, and a Fading Hope, and I ditched an island.
That's a hand, you know.
It's literally a hand, but that's also a hand where you kind of have to like count. I think,
You got to
yes,
believe in the
thinking
heart of
back
the
in it, I'd
cards.
probably. Well, I don't have any hard removal, right? So that Blood Tithe Harvester is going to be a problem all game
Not
if I don't
really,
if I
because
don't counter it.
if you've got the gin, or if you find the gin, it's not
Yeah, you have to
like
find it.
sure it puts you on a clock. That's that's definitely like true, but
Mhm.
any of your creatures would have stabilized.
Right, but I had no card advantage and no creatures in hand,
Yeah,
and so
I
maybe
mean
that's
with
an
the hand that
like
you're looking at, yes, it was a
yeah,
good counter,
and
but
and so maybe that's an actual argument to mold a 5 there. I mean, probably not. I feel like 3 counter spells, like 1-for-1ing with you and trying to draw my way out of it might be like might have a higher upside in win rate, but like it's just not the kind of hand that's going to win that matchup.
Yeah.
Like no pressure, all interaction is you're going to win that matchup. So I don't know. I'm not sure what that. I'm still tilted. I think either game 2 or 3 I could have won. Probably game 2. Um, but man, close games though.
Game two was so close with the way that we were racing there.
Yeah,
Flesh Gorger carried. Oh my god.
I
I
know.
forgot.
Yeah, I mean, what am I supposed to do about it, right?
during game one, I was like, I need to cut this from my deck. It shouldn't be here. And then game two, it carried. I was apologizing to the Phyrexian Flesh Gorger. George.
Well, the funny part is, right, like you kind of have that in place of Graveyard Trespasser, right?
Either Graveyard
Or is this
Trespasser
main
or
deck?
Corpse Appraiser. Corpse Appraiser,
Sure.
I have 2 of main deck.
Yeah, Corpse Appraiser is pretty good though. Graveyard Trespasser is, I think, actively not very good.
Yes, I agree.
And Flesh Gorger there is way better than Graveyard Trespasser, like by a lot.
Yeah, it's such a different format from like Explorer or Pioneer, where you could 100% make the argument for Graveyard Trespasser being better there. You physically can't for this. Like, the life gain is so much more important standard than it is in Explorer, where the card advantage is much more important.
Right, and especially against me, who is not going to have hard removal.
Yeah,
like I basically can't interact with the flavor. Like, what am I going to do? Bounce it? Like, dome myself for 3. You gain 3. Bounce it. You just play it again next turn. Like, it doesn't actually resolve the problem. I mean, I guess it keeps you from gaining 3 life for 1 turn. But like, is that what we're really doing?
Yeah.
Yeah.
The Graveyard Trespasser also never drains. The nice thing is, though, it does exile spells from your graveyard. I had a little bit of a spicy board. I want to run this by you. So I cut out a bunch of cards that did nothing in the matchup. Like, I cut out Cut Down, I cut out Reckoner Bankbuster, cut out Mishra's.
Oh, you cut out the Cut Down.
Yeah, dude. It doesn't hit any of your creatures.
I mean, it hits 4 of my Delver.
Yeah, so but I also thought that Delver was not going to do very much in the matchup.
Right, which is why I cut one of them in game 3. But yeah, I don't know. The nice thing about Delver there is that if you're cutting your cut downs, it always trades up in mana, which is good.
Yeah,
but I thought you were gonna board into a lot more interaction, which makes Delver much worse. Like, if your Delver's just always I know, and like that was the thing I was fighting against, where it's like, okay, I need to end the game quicker than you want to end the game, which means Delver probably makes sense to keep in. But also, kind of the last thing I want to do is play a Delver and then fight over it all game and then lose to Shieldred or something. Because that's just so card bad for me. Like, spending cards protecting something that's not the most important creature in the matchup's probably not a good idea. Like, for instance, what happens if I play my Delver, we fight over it, then I play Haughty Djinn and have nothing to protect the Haughty Djinn with, and I just die? Like, that's not a good that's not a good play pattern.
Yeah, no, not at all.
But also, are we going to cut the Delver and take early game pressure off you? Like, I don't know. That was the catch-22 I was in with the board.
I think that's genuinely reasonable because you can turn a corner really quickly with the Djinn. So in game 2, at the very end there, if you had cast the what's it called? The draw 3, discard 2.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
If you had cast that and ditched 2 cards, you would have had me down to 3 life one of the turns and then 6 life one of the other of the turns. So it's not unreasonable that you could have like pumped Djinn to a way that you turn the corner on a dime instead of like slowing down.
I was trying to do
able to do the thing.
I genuinely think I had the win if you didn't have exactly burned down the house. The fact that, like, firstly, I forgot that the Devil's Ping. That's my fault. Secondly, the fact that you went wide and I didn't have enough blockers for you was tough. Like that,
Yeah.
I was like, okay, yeah, that is how I lose the game because I was planning on ambushing you with this spectral adversary. I'm sorry. Yeah, it is spectral adversary, right?
Yes.
Yes. Um, I'm like, this is a great card in this spot. It's going to be 3 damage in the air that he doesn't like that you kind of can't do anything about. It's also going to save me life because I'm going to blank a blocker. It may even save a creature. And so like it's almost a 3-for-1 with 3 damage in the air that you can't necessarily deal with unless you have instant speed interaction. I'm like, okay, this is what I'm gonna mold the win around. And then I missed on land one turn, which kind of set me back a turn. And then I got put in this tough spot where I couldn't exactly maximize the spectral adversary. Like I had a chance to cast it for 2 and just have a 2/1 flyer in the air. I'm like, I think that's not actually going to win me the game. I think I do need to do this like ambushy trick play, and then the burn down the house going wide just made that play seem idiotic. Like,
Mm-hmm.
like that's exactly how I lose that. Right? It's like you go around it. Like the spectral adversary phasing out one of your creatures just isn't enough.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm not sure. It was tough calculations, really marginal decisions there for me at least.
Mm-hmm. I think that's. I mean, I'd love to see what the actual like turn order was because it's tough to describe it after the fact and like do it justice because it's going to be really interesting to watch these games back.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. Definitely looking back, like I don't know if there were any decisions that would have led a different course, but you know that's one of the things. I feel like Mono Blue is a relatively low agency deck, whereas the Grixis deck, I feel like there's just so many different like paths you can take. Because with Mono Blue, it's like, oh well, which of the counter spells or protection spells am I going to use in this turn? And like you've edited the deck to be a little bit more interactive with like things like Spectral Adversary and things like Fading Hope, which honestly all of the Mono Blue decks I've seen have just used it as the like 5th and 6th copy of the phasing spell.
Yeah, that's terrible. I didn't realize that. I think most of what I pulled, most of this Mono Blue deck is straight up a net deck, with the exception of the Spectral Adversary in the board instead of like something else because I didn't have the wild cards for it.
Mm-hmm.
But I do think Spectral Adversary is at least interesting. I don't know how good it is, but
it did work. I was scared. I was scared to be seeing it that turn, and I thought, oh, is he going to be able to survive this turn somehow?
Yeah, well, what I was worried. I mean, there's a lot of different options you have with it, which makes it interesting, right? So, like, you could use it to save your own creature against a removal spell. You could use it to save a creature while blocking a lethal attack, which is what I was gonna try to use it for against you, where it changes the combat math where you think you have lethal, and then all of a sudden I add 3 power to the board or 4 power to the board if I have 6 mana. Prevent your lethal attack and then have a lethal attack of my own, which, you know, that's a powerful effect.
Yeah,
or if it's a powerful strategic tool to have in your toolbox. But you know, it's also 4 mana and doesn't do a ton. You know, if you're trying to get back in the game, so yeah, I'm not sure. I don't know. My brain is still racked from the game. I'm like I was like still trying to like calculate all my options, but interestingly, to go back to like our strategic versus tactical play conversations,
mm-hmm.
I think Mono Blue, and I think especially this Mono Blue deck, really incentivizes understanding both. Because there are turns where you're like, I have a Haughty Djinn, and even though it's the biggest thing on the board, I need to hold it back on defense and get it big enough to attack, and that's a strategic decision. But then also seeing that line of like, I did not see the line of, what's the draw spell? The one that ditches a basic.
Oh yeah. The I know.
I didn't see that.
It's a draw 3 in. Blue.
Yeah, I didn't see that line where like I could technically pump the Haughty Djinn by 3 by just casting that spell.
Mm-hmm.
which is a tactical decision. It's like a tactical blunder, right, for me not to see it. And so deciding when you're going to attack and when you're not, when you're going to shove all in, and when you're going to stay back and hope for better cards off the top it's a fine dance you have to do when piloting.
Yeah.
Because I ultimately don't have that many resources. Like, the advantage of your Grixis deck is everything, all your cards kind of do a lot of stuff.
Yeah, they all like draw a card, or they like trade up in value, like Phyrexian Flesh Gorge, or like take cheaper damage. They like, I will say there's less cards in this deck that just straight up like act as 2 cards or draw extra cards.
Yeah,
than
for sure.
Than like the Explorer, like Rakdos mid-range deck.
Mm-hmm.
But there's definitely things that exist in the deck that do that. Like Invoke Despair just is an insane amount of top end that draws you an insane amount of cards, and we didn't get to see it, but it was in my hand one of the games, so I do remember that.
I wasn't even playing around it, I'll be honest. Like, like maybe I had a counterspell on hand for it, but like that's the kind of card that's just gonna blow me out if it resolves. Like,
Yeah.
what am I working with most games? 2 creatures, and like I'm on the thin line of trying to keep up with cards for you too. That's one of the things I get. Like, if we could talk about this a little bit, if we're gonna turn into like the slight podcast version of this,
Mm-hmm.
which is, you see a lot of complaining online about playing against the mono blue deck and people thinking it's just counterspell tribal and you just counterspell everything and then you win.
Mm-hmm.
The thing that I think a lot of people don't realize on the pilot side of that is you don't see a ton of counterspells per game. Like, maybe I see 2. I got, like, it was a weird game that I started the game with 3 counterspells in hand and I still lost that game. And what you decide to counter is the most important part of the deck. You need to let things resolve a lot of the times, and deciding what's worth resolving and what's worth countering is the game. And that could be very difficult to weigh those options in your head. From the standpoint of playing against the mono blue deck, what kind of things are going through your head as to what you're going to allow to be countered and what you're not?
So the thing that when I'm looking at the matchup, the heart of the matchup to me is how many must counter spells exist in your repertoire as the Grixis deck,
Mm-hmm.
and how you can force out the counter spells to put you into a position where I'm killing the things that are going to clock me. I'm most worried about the clock in this matchup because it is a tempo deck that I'm playing against, and as long as I can draw that clock out long enough to be able to land the things that are going to swing in my favor, I'm totally fine with that. I know I'm going to have more card advantage than your deck. I know I'm going to be able to eventually pull out ahead. I just need to survive. And the survive part of this is not necessarily put out blockers in this case. It's find ways to kill your creatures. So I'm trying to like play all of the stuff that's going to accrue value early and sandbag removal spells to play around counters. So the entire time I'm looking for every single instance that I can kill your creatures. So that's why when I'm boarding, I board in every single removal spell I can that will actually hit your creatures. That's why when I started playing the game, that opening hand I had 4 lands, a Ronos Vortex, and 2 Sheoldreds. I played both Sheoldreds before I played the Ronos Vortex because it was so much more important for me to be able to kill your creature than it was for me to be able to like put a creature on board that's going to deal damage. Who the fuck cares about that? That doesn't stabilize me. Killing your creature does.
I think that's a great case study in what you need to care about as the deck playing against a mono blue deck, or like any deck that's super high in counterspells. You understood what the game was about, and you understood what is threatening to me and what isn't.
Mm-hmm.
So I needed to counter those Shellies because I have no board interaction. Like, what am I going to do against them if they resolve? But the Shelly from your side of the matchup isn't what's going to win you the game. Right? So the Shelly landing is way more important for me than it is for you. And that's where you get your value against these decks that have a ton of counterspells in them.
Mm-hmm.
Is recognizing what is a problem for me
and what's like
Because
necessary to resolve for me.
yeah, and so what's necessary to resolve for you is your removal.
Yeah.
Because if I ever get to the point where I'm countering a removal spell, then I untap. It's my turn. I attack with the 6 power Haughty Djinn. Like no good. Like that. That's how you lose the game, right?
Mhm.
And so understand that you could take a beat from a Delver, from one of my Haughty Djinns, so that you can force me to use my interaction, and then just deal with my creatures is an important thing to understand. Um,
Yeah, I mean, I'll go back to it's just all about the clock. And I mean, that's the thing. Like the normal way that this deck is able to get an advantage over yours is by landing removal spells, but it's not the only way. Like we saw that in game 2. I was able to like pull ahead in that game because I had something that was a life linker on the battlefield. That
yeah.
turn before I played the Flesh Gorger, I did play out a spell that I knew would be countered in your turn
hmm
just to try and like land Flesh Gorger the next turn.
hmm Yeah, and I think that's one of the things that people don't realize. Like they see a counterspell um as me not allowing you to play the game or what have you. But what all you're doing is trading a card for another card, right?
Yeah.
Um, and that's how I win the game. That like I laugh every time I'm playing one of these tempo decks, and I have 2 mana up. Let's say it's turn 3, and the opponent just passes back. Like that's how like I won that turn. I basically countered what you were going to play on turn 3, and I didn't spend a card or mana for it.
Mm-hmm. It's
Right,
a
because you
free
just
unsubstantiate right there.
it literally is because like you have to play something into my counterspell. You can't just not. Right?
Yeah.
That's how I win. So you have to choose the thing that is worth me countering, but is not the most important card for you to beat me.
Mm-hmm.
And that's sort of the dance you play against these tempo decks. Is we're both making bets on like you put a card on the stack, and we're both betting whether or not this card is worth countering. And then it's up to me to decide whether okay, I'm going to let this resolve or I'm going to counter it. And if I'm right and that card needed to be countered, then I probably win. And if I'm wrong and I should have let it resolve and I needed to save this counter spell for a more important card, then I lose.
Yeah. Uh,
Mm.
I love the I totally agree with what you've said, and I also just wanted to express how much I really like this matchup. Um,
Yeah.
not as like a oh I love the like particular.
Grixis' game
Yeah.
against Mono Blue or something.
Well, it's not like oh I think Grixis is so much favored against Mono Blue.
Yeah,
If
yeah.
anything between the two, Mono Blue might have the edge. But
I think it's
what
close,
I
but yeah,
think
I
is
think
like
Mono Blue has the edge.
it's entirely a mind game that you're playing. You're trying to guess what cards he has in hand and try and draw out like what you're playing, and meanwhile you're trying to stave off threats and get in there with as much damage as possible as early as possible, like trying to get under.
Yeah,
It's
and you can peel. It's a game of peeling a lot of information around things that aren't played,
yeah, yeah.
right?
That's
Like
that's the thing.
this,
So much of Magic is like a face-up game where you're trying to like figure out your lines with stuff that's already on the table. This none of the stuff that we were talking about is on the table. It's all on the stack.
yeah, and in hand. So like I'll use an example. I think it's from game 1 where you had it was turn 3. You had 3 mana up. I think I had 2 mana up. Like clearly telegraphing a counterspell. You tap 2 and play a tenacious underdog instead of tapping 3 and playing your Fable. I let that resolve, even though I have a make disappear in my hand, and I know for turn 4 um, that you probably have a Fable in your hand.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so I draw, say go. I forget exactly what I did on my side of the battlefield, and then you play the Fable, and I let it resolve because I have a Fading Hope. I have Fading Hope the token, and now this is the dance. And for a couple turns in a row, I called what you were playing, but that doesn't mean like I was ahead. It means like I knew what was going to happen,
Yeah.
and the game continues. Um, but yeah, that's the game is in what you don't play against counterspells. And from the counterspell side, it's the game is in what you don't counter, not in what you do.
Yeah. Interesting matchup. Fun bunch of games.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think's next?
I don't know. Half of me wants me to jam these like one more time.
I'd be happy to do that again. It's
Yeah, let's. I'm interested to see how like knowing more about what your deck wants to do and you know what the having a little bit more metagame knowledge will do. I will say, playing a tempo deck, you get the most win rate from knowing the meta.
yeah,
There are other decks that we've talked about before where you get your most win rate from being a super good technical player. There are other games where you get your most win rate from your deck building choices and your sideboarding choices. Tempo, you knowing the meta is going to be where you find a lot of your wins.